Edward, Matt, and Jerry sat around the table, the weight of their shared secret hanging in the air. None of them had known about the others, but now, here they were, bound by one woman's deceit. Edward leaned back, his eyes flicking between the two men as he spoke in a calm, controlled tone. "So here's the deal," Edward said, his voice steady. "I'm her husband, Matt is her fiancé, and Jerry, well, you've been on those islands with her while we were all kept in the dark." Matt looked at Edward, confusion still evident in his eyes. I had no idea about you, man," he said, shaking his head. "How could she, Edward's gaze hardened. "Yeah, me neither, but turns out she's been juggling us all. Each of us playing our part thinking we were the only one." Jerry leaned forward, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "She's a master at this. How do we all fall for it?" Edward's lips curled into a tight smile. "She was smart, I'll give her that. But now we all know the truth. And the truth, well, it doesn't look good for her." Matt shifted in his seat, frustration creeping into his voice. "So what now? Do we just walk away?" Edward shook his head slowly. "No, this isn't about walking away. This is about showing her exactly what happens when you think you can play people like this." Jerry let out a slow breath, the realization of what Edward was suggesting sinking in. "You mean ruin her?" Edward's eyes flicked to Jerry, then to Matt. "Not just ruin her. I want her to lose everything. I want her to know exactly what it feels like to be exposed. She's played us all, and it's time she faces the music." Matt's jaw tightened. "I'm in." Jerry, still uneasy but resigned, nodded. "Yeah, let's do this." The three men locked eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. They weren't just going to expose Samantha's lies, they were going to make sure she had nothing left. It all started one evening when Edward decided to take the dog out for a walk. Normally, it was Samantha who handled the evening walks, but tonight she was away on a business trip. Edward didn't mind much. He was used to it, and the dog needed some exercise. The walk should have been routine, something calming after a long day, but tonight was different. He felt an unusual knot in his stomach, a kind of restless tension that he couldn't shake off. Maybe it was the silence in the house, or the empty space where Samantha would usually be. Either way, it left him feeling oddly uneasy. As they walked down the street, the dog suddenly tugged hard on the leash, yanking Edward forward. Surprised, he quickly let go of the leash as the dog dashed across the road, heading straight toward a large house on the other side. "Damn it," Edward muttered under his breath, quickening his pace to follow. His steps were heavy as he tried to catch up. The leash dangled in his hand, useless as the dog ran ahead, eager to explore. By the time he reached the gate, the dog had slipped through and was running up the driveway. Edward rushed in after the dog just in time to grab the leash. As he turned to leave, he froze. There, sitting on a terrace with a glass of wine, was a man. Edward stayed hidden behind the bushes, watching him intently. The man was casually talking on his phone, his voice smooth, easygoing. Edward's heart skipped a beat as he strained to hear the conversation. "I've been meaning to thank you again for the ring. You really know how to spoil me, don't you?" Samantha's voice came through clearly, soft and seductive. Edward's stomach sank like a stone. That ring, it was the one he had given her for their anniversary, the one he'd spent weeks saving for, the one he thought meant everything. His hands tightened around the dog's leash, his knuckles white. The man laughed softly, clearly pleased with himself. "Of course. I knew it was the perfect one for you. You deserve the best, Samantha." Edward couldn't believe his ears. He had no idea, not a single inkling that his wife, the woman he had trusted, was involved with someone else. His chest tightened painfully, but he couldn't move. He couldn't tear himself away from the conversation, even though every part of him screamed to leave, to storm over there and confront them. "You know, I can't believe you're really doing it," the man continued, his voice filled with a kind of smug satisfaction. "Leaving him for good, for us. No more problems, no more divorce mess." Edward's blood ran cold. Divorce? She was leaving him? It felt like the world had shifted under his feet. He couldn't breathe. He leaned in closer, desperate to hear more, to understand. Samantha's voice responded, and there was an odd, almost relieved tone in it. "I know, it's better this way. With you, I feel free. I don't want to go back." Edward felt as if the ground had just fallen away from beneath him. "I don't want to go back." She had been planning her escape all along, pretending everything was fine, pretending she was still in this marriage. She had already made up her mind. He was just the obstacle she had to deal with. To her, it was all a game where she had already won. He was nothing but a temporary distraction. The man spoke again, his voice full of certainty, as if everything had already been settled. And once we're done with all this, you won't have to worry about anything. No more sneaking around. Edward stood frozen, his mind racing. The weight of it all started to sink in. This wasn't about the man. Not really. The man was just a pawn in Samantha's game. Just another part of her double life that Edward had never seen. He wasn't even supposed to know. Edward's grip on the leash tightened until his fingers ached. He felt a strange sense of calm settling over him, like he was finally seeing everything clearly. He wasn't going to be her fool anymore. She wasn't going to play him like this without consequences. For a moment, he stood there, staring at the man, at the situation unfolding before him. The words felt like a slap in the face, but they were also a wake-up call. He wasn't going to storm in and confront the man. That wasn't the right move. He had to think this through. He had to be strategic. He took one last deep breath, letting it out slowly, before quietly turning around and walking back down the street, the dog trotting beside him, unaware of the storm that had just started to brew. As he walked back to the house, his thoughts were already racing ahead, formulating a plan. He didn't need to confront Samantha now. He needed to bide his time. This wasn't just about confronting her or exposing her. It was about making sure she understood that there were consequences for her actions. She wouldn't get away with this, not this time. When he got home, Edward closed the door behind him, but the weight of the truth felt heavier than ever. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage was a lie. Now, it was time to make sure Samantha paid for everything she had done. Edward walked home with the dog, the cool night air brushing against his face as his mind churned over the events of the evening. The rage that had boiled inside him earlier had settled, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. The anger was still there, but it was more focused now, more controlled. He had been married to Samantha for 5 years, and in all that time, they still had no children. He had always understood Samantha's hesitation. Growing up in a large, poor family, she had often told him she wanted to live for herself before taking on the responsibility of parenthood. He had understood that then. He'd accepted it, thinking it made sense. After all, who wouldn't want to build their own life before being tied down by the responsibility of raising children? It had seemed reasonable at the time, a natural desire for freedom, for self-discovery. But now, as Edward walked through the quiet streets, his footsteps crunching on the pavement, something in the back of his mind shifted. The reality of that living for herself suddenly began to sink in, and it felt different. It felt like it meant something else entirely. What had seemed like an innocent desire to grow as an individual had, over time, morphed into something far more complicated. And that's when the truth hit him, the unsettling realization that he had been blind all along. Samantha was always away on business trips, long ones, too many of them. He had never questioned it, never thought much about it. She was busy and he was busy, their lives, their separate spaces, their busy schedules. It had all seemed fine, even normal. He'd convinced himself that this was just the way things were. But now everything felt different. The air was thick with the weight of his thoughts. The distance between them, the unexplained absences, they had always seemed like just little bumps in the road, nothing more. But now he wasn't so sure. What if those trips weren't business at all? What if she had just been lying to him? The thought hit him like a cold wave. What if she's not where she says she is? What if she's been playing me this whole time? The words echoed in his head over and over until they felt like a punch to the gut. His pace quickened as the dog tugged impatiently at the leash. Edward's mind raced, and for a second, he could almost hear Samantha's voice in his head, the one she used so often when explaining why she needed her space. I grew up with nothing. I wanted more for myself. I wanted to be something before we had kids. It had always been her excuse. He had always accepted it. But now, that same explanation didn't sit right with him. It didn't feel as valid as it once did. She had used it to justify everything, to justify her growing distance. But now he saw it for what it was. It wasn't just about living for herself. It was about living two lives. With a heavy sigh, Edward pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he unlocked the screen. He knew what he had to do now. He couldn't keep going on like this, unsure, doubting. He needed proof, not just suspicions. He needed to know for sure. And if she was lying to him, he needed to uncover the truth, all of it. His thumb hovered over the screen as he dialed Chris's number, waiting for the call to connect. When his friend finally answered, there was no time for pleasantries. Edward's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything he was feeling. "I need your help," he said, his words tight with frustration. "I think Sam's been lying to me. I need to know where she is right now. I need to know if she's really on a business trip or if she's somewhere else." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Chris had always been the kind of friend who didn't hesitate, who never asked too many questions, and now it was no different. "You want me to track her?" Chris asked, his voice steady, though Edward could tell he was taking this seriously. Edward clenched his jaw, feeling the anger rise again. "Yes," he said sharply. "I need to know everything, where she's been, what she's been doing. I need the truth." Chris hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, this time with more softness in his voice. "All right, man, I'll do it, but you owe me big time for this." Edward didn't care about the debt. His mind was already consumed with thoughts of Samantha's betrayal. "I don't care, just get it done. I'll meet you in an hour." The call ended, and Edward slipped the phone back into his pocket, his heart pounding in his chest. The dog was still walking at his side, unaware of the storm that had just started to brew. Edward looked down at the animal, but his thoughts were miles away. He had been played. He was certain of it now. But this was just the beginning. He would find out the truth, no matter what. And when he did, Samantha wouldn't be able to hide anymore. Edward sat at his desk, the dog lying at his feet, completely unaware of the storm brewing in the air. His mind raced, filled with a mix of emotions, but he knew he had to stay calm. He couldn't let himself act rashly. The time had come. It was now or never. With a deep breath, Edward dialed Samantha's number and waited, the seconds feeling like hours. When the line clicked, Samantha's voice came through, breathless and uneven. "Hello?" Edward kept his tone casual, masking the anger boiling inside him. "Hey, Sam, it's just me and the dog here. He's missing you." He gave a small, tight smile as he spoke, though his heart was already pounding in his chest. "Oh, I've just been, busy." Her voice sounded off, rushed. "I've been running around a lot." Edward raised an eyebrow, sensing that something was wrong. "Busy, huh?" he said, repeating the word as if testing it. "What's got you running so much? You must be working hard over there." He could hear a faint rustling on her end, a noise that didn't feel right, almost like she was trying to hide something. "Yeah, just trying to get everything done here," Samantha replied quickly, almost too quickly. Her voice still didn't sound right. Her breath still shallow, as if she was trying to hide something from him. Edward glanced over at Chris, who was sitting across the room at his computer. Chris, the hacker, looked up, giving him a small nod. Everything was ready. "Can you hold her for just 30 seconds?" Chris mouthed silently. Edward nodded back, knowing that now was the time. "Sounds like a lot going on, huh?" Edward kept his tone light, trying to draw her out. "We've been good, though. The dog's been keeping me company. He's been giving me that look like he expects you to come back any minute now." Samantha's response was quick, almost too quick. "I miss you both," she said. "I'll be home soon, Ed." Edward could hear the hesitation, the thinness of her words, and in that moment he knew. "Soon," he repeated slowly, letting the word linger in the air. "We'll wait. But, I have to admit he misses you a lot." Chris was now tracking her location. Edward could feel his pulse quicken. The truth was almost there. "Take your time, Sam. We'll be here when you get back." Samantha's voice softened, almost too much so. "Yeah, I know. See you soon?" The call ended. Edward placed the phone down on the desk. He didn't need to look at Chris to know it was done. Chris confirmed it with a slight nod. "She's on the islands in the hotel we suspected, and she's definitely not alone." Edward sat back in his chair, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. "It's just a matter of time now," he murmured under his breath, his eyes shifting to the dog sitting quietly by his side. The animal wagged its tail, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. As the air in the room thickened with tension, Chris spoke up. "I know this is painful, Ed, but I've been where you are." He hesitated, and Edward could feel the weight of his words. "My wife did the same thing to me. I found out the hard way. She was seeing someone else for months before I found out. I know how it feels to be betrayed. And I know what we're about to do. It's not just about revenge. It's about making sure they understand what happens when they mess with us." Edward's eyes flickered toward Chris, and for the first time he saw the depth of pain in his friend's eyes. "You're not alone in this, I get it, and I don't forgive this either." Edward took a deep breath, feeling the anger surge again, but he steadied himself. "Thanks, Chris. You don't know how much this means. We're going to make her regret every single thing." He looked down at the phone again, already preparing himself for the next steps. It was time. No more waiting, no more lies. "Let's get this done," the dog barked, seemingly oblivious to the conversation. But for Edward, the game had already begun. Edward stood in front of the door, the dog sitting calmly beside him. The weight of the situation hung in the air, and as he knocked on the door, the tension was almost unbearable. It wasn't just about confronting the man who had been sleeping with his wife. It was about something much larger. The door creaked open after a few seconds. The man standing in front of him was shorter than Edward had imagined, but his presence was still unsettling. It was Matt, one of the lovers. He looked at the dog first, his expression shifting to one of confusion. "Hey," Matt said, his voice slightly uncertain. "Can I help you?" Edward nodded, offering a calm but cold smile. "I think you know this guy." He gestured to the dog, who wagged his tail. "He's been with me tonight. Looks like he knows you." Matt glanced down at the dog and nodded. "Yeah, he's Sam's dog, but who are you?" "I'm her husband," Edward said plainly, his tone quiet but deliberate. "Edward," the weight of the words hung in the air between them. Matt blinked in surprise, confusion clearly crossing his face. Edward stood there for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Then Edward reached into his coat pocket, pulling out an envelope with a flight ticket. He held it out toward Matt, the gesture smooth but firm. "You're probably wondering how this all fits together, but I think you should know the truth." Matt's eyes flicked down to the ticket in his hand, then back up to Edward, his confusion deepening. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice now tense. Edward didn't flinch. "That's your ticket. I've already booked one for myself, and I thought you might want to join me. I'm going to show you exactly who Sam is and what she's been hiding from both of us." Matt's jaw dropped. "Wait. You want me to just go with you? What the hell is going on?" Edward's expression was neutral, but his voice grew sharper. "You don't have a choice, Matt. This isn't just about you or me. This is about finding out the truth. We've both been lied to. If you're curious about how deep it goes, then this is the only way to find out." Matt looked down at the ticket in his hand, visibly shaken. He took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the situation. "You've got to be kidding me. She told me she was divorced." Edward nodded slowly, the truth settling heavily in his words. "Of course she did. She's been lying to you. To both of us. She's good at making it seem like nothing's wrong, like we're the only ones in her life." The silence between them stretched, and Matt's face twisted in disbelief. "How long has this been going on? How did I not know about you?" Edward didn't answer right away, letting the weight of the question linger in the air. Finally, he spoke. "As long as she's been lying to you, but you don't have to stay in the dark. You can come with me, see for yourself what she's really been doing." Matt's gaze shifted from the ticket back to Edward, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. "So what now?" he asked, his voice wavering. "We go together. We confront her." Edward paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That's the plan, but there's one thing we need to do first. We need to see her together, and we need to make sure she knows exactly who she's been fooling." Matt looked at the ticket again, his mind racing. After a long pause, he finally sighed. "Fine, let's do it. I'll go with you. But when we find her, I'm not backing down." Edward nodded, the corners of his mouth turning up just slightly. "Good. It's time we all get the truth." They stood in silence for a moment before Edward turned to leave, the dog obediently following him. Matt stood still, staring at the ticket in his hand. The gravity of the situation was finally sinking in, and he knew that this trip would change everything. Edward and Matt finally arrived on the island, the tropical air heavy with the scent of salt and sun. The waves gently lapped against the shore, and the light from the setting sun bathed everything in golden hues. But none of it reached them. The beauty of the place felt far away, distant. All that mattered now was the truth about Samantha. They checked into the hotel, their steps slow and heavy, the silence between them thick. Both men were processing the same realization in different ways: betrayal, rage, confusion. They could barely bring themselves to speak. After settling in, they decided to take a walk along the beach, hoping to clear their heads. As they walked side by side, the sound of the surf did little to ease the tension. "I still can't wrap my head around this," Matt muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I've been with her for months, thinking she was, I don't know, perfect. And now this." Edward's eyes were distant, focusing on the horizon but seeing nothing. His mind was spinning with the realization of what he had witnessed. "I know." His voice was low, filled with the anger he was struggling to contain. "She's been living this lie right in front of us. We're just, pawns in her game." The two men walked in silence for a moment before Matt spoke again, his voice raw with frustration. "Do you think he knows about us?" He glanced over at Edward. "The guy she's with, does he even know about me? Or you?" Edward's jaw tightened, his fists balling at his sides. "No, he doesn't know about either of us." His voice was cold, almost mechanical, as if he were preparing himself for something that was yet to come. But he will, soon enough. They turned a corner and the beach opened up before them, the sand stretching out under the golden light. And then they saw them. There, standing at the water's edge, was Samantha, with her lover. The man was tall, tanned, his hair messy from the wind. He stood close to her, a hand lightly resting on her waist. They were laughing, talking softly to each other, as though the world around them had disappeared. The sound of their laughter felt almost like a slap to Edward's face, as if they were mocking him. Then, the man leaned in, and, without warning, Samantha tipped her head back, closing her eyes as their lips met. It wasn't a quick kiss. It was slow, deliberate. A kiss that seemed to linger, like a promise being made. Edward's heart clenched as he watched, his stomach knotting. He could see the passion in the way they kissed, the way Samantha's arms went around him, pulling him closer. She was pressing herself against the man, her body giving into the kiss as though she had no memory of anyone else. "She's really doing this," Matt said, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes were glued to the scene in front of him, his entire body tense with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "I can't believe this." Edward stood frozen for a moment, the sight of them burning into his mind. The anger inside him was growing, boiling up, but he couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the overwhelming rush of emotions: betrayal, humiliation, and rage. He wanted to storm over to them, to grab the man and throw him to the ground, to shout at Samantha, to make her face the truth. But something stopped him. As much as he hated what he was seeing, he couldn't bring himself to act in that moment. He needed to understand. He needed to know the full extent of her betrayal before he acted. Samantha pulled away from the kiss. Her face flushed, and the man smiled at her. He whispered something, and she laughed, clearly lost in the moment. "Does he even know who we are?" Matt asked again, his voice quieter now, filled with frustration. He was watching them too, unable to look away. "Does he know about me? Or you?" Edward's gaze remained fixed on them as he responded, his voice laced with a cold fury. "No. He thinks he's the only one." His hands were clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles turned white. But that's going to change. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the two of them share another kiss, a kiss full of affection, of closeness. The kind of kiss Edward had once shared with her, the kind of kiss that meant nothing now. "I can't just stand here and let this happen," Matt muttered, taking a step forward, his eyes blazing with anger. Edward grabbed his arm, pulling him back gently. "Not yet," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to be smart about this. We need to understand the whole picture before we burn it down." They both stood there for a while longer, watching as Samantha and her lover continued to kiss and laugh by the water, oblivious to the two men standing at a distance. Edward's mind was working fast now, calculating what to do next. The fire of anger inside him had been lit, but he knew that the best revenge wasn't to lash out blindly. It was to make Samantha face the truth in the most public way possible. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they turned away from the beach and started walking back in the direction of the hotel. But as they walked, the silence between them was heavy. Neither spoke, but both were thinking the same thing. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The night was warm, with the stars above the island glimmering faintly. a stark contrast to the brewing storm of emotions below. Edward and Matt had made their plans carefully, each move deliberate. They were in the hotel lobby now, walking towards a quiet corner away from the prying eyes of other guests. Edward was focused, eyes hard, thinking of the next step. He could feel the weight of the situation in his gut. This wasn't just revenge. It was something more calculated, something deeper. "She'll be back soon," Matt said, his voice tight with anticipation. "You're sure about this?" He glanced at Edward as if checking for any hint of doubt. "Absolutely," Edward replied, his jaw tight. "We do this right. We leave her with nothing." The plan was set, and Matt had already made his move. He was going to distract Samantha for just enough time, giving Edward and him the opportunity to talk to the third man, Jerry. Matt pulled out his phone and dialed Samantha's number. Edward gave him a slight nod and moved further away, preparing for what was coming. "Hey, Sam." Matt's voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent of something else there. "I've arranged a little surprise for you. I had some champagne and strawberries sent up to your room. Thought you might like to relax after all the excitement today." Samantha, likely already in a good mood from the time spent with her lover, responded quickly. "Oh, really? You shouldn't have." Her voice was bubbly, surprised, and flattered. "You're too good to me." "I know, you deserve it. Just head back to your room. It'll be waiting there." Matt's voice was smooth, convincing. He knew exactly how to play her. "You're the best," Samantha said, the affection clear in her tone. "I'll go up now. I'll send you a picture when I'm settled. Don't go anywhere, okay? I'll be waiting." Matt ended the conversation with a smile, looking over at Edward, who was already heading toward Jerry, waiting in a quiet corner near the bar. The moment was critical, the tension palpable. Samantha hung up, oblivious to what was really unfolding, and made her way toward her room. Matt turned to Edward, a nod between them confirming that it was time to move. Edward walked confidently over to Jerry, who was sitting at the bar casually sipping his drink. His surprise was evident when he saw the two men approaching. "What's going on?" Jerry asked, raising an eyebrow as they slid into the seats next to him. His face was a mix of curiosity and confusion. "We need to talk," Edward said, his voice low but firm, his eyes never leaving Jerry's. "It's about Samantha." The three of them sat together in the dimly lit bar, the air thick with tension. Edward and Matt exchanged glances, the weight of their shared anger pulling them closer together. Across from them, Jerry sat, his face a mixture of disbelief and confusion. The clinking of glasses and murmurs from the other patrons seemed distant, as if they were the only three people in the world. "So, you're both telling me the same thing. That she's been with you, and you've known about each other." Jerry's voice was laced with skepticism. His fingers tapped nervously on his glass, his eyes darting from one man to the other. "But I can't believe it. I can't." Edward sighed heavily, leaning forward, his eyes hardening with frustration. "I know it's hard to hear, but we wouldn't be here if it wasn't true. She's been lying to all of us. She's been playing us." Matt shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his anger bubbling just below the surface. "She's been playing you too, Jerry. She told me she was going on business trips, but she was with Edward. She told Edward she was working while she was with me. She's had us all fooled." Jerry shook his head, still unwilling to accept the truth. "I don't know. You're both telling me she's been doing this for months, maybe years, but I don't believe it. She wouldn't do that to me." Edward exchanged a look with Matt, his voice calm but sharp. "You're not the only one she's lied to. She's been telling me the same things. All the while, she's been seeing you, Matt, and probably someone else too. But you can't keep denying the truth. It's right here." Jerry leaned back in his chair, staring at them both, clearly torn. "I just don't get it. Why would she do this?" Matt pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly, as he unlocked it and flipped through his pictures. "Here," he said, holding up a photo. "This was from our engagement party. She's my fiancée. You can see how happy she looks. But you didn't know, did you?" Jerry's eyes widened as he looked at the photo. The image of Samantha, beaming with joy beside Matt, hit him harder than any words could. His jaw tightened as he tried to digest the evidence. "So this is what's been going on?" Jerry's voice cracked slightly as he leaned forward, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm just supposed to believe this now?" Edward didn't wait for an answer. He pulled out his own phone and swiped through it quickly. "Here, this is from our wedding day. Samantha and I were married 5 years ago." He showed Jerry a picture of the two of them standing at the altar, beaming with happiness, just like the one Matt had shown. You can see, right? She's been married to me, engaged to Matt, and who knows how many other men, including you." Jerry stared at the pictures, his face pale, the truth sinking in. The weight of it all was too much to deny. His mouth went dry as the images of Samantha in her different roles, wife, fiancée, all became painfully clear. "Jesus," Jerry whispered. "You're right. She's been lying to all of us. But why?" Edward's tone grew colder. "Because she thinks she can get away with it. She's been playing us for fools, but now we're taking control." Matt nodded. "We're not the only ones she's deceived, Jerry. She's messed with all of us. And now it's time for her to face the consequences." Jerry still looked stunned, but the pieces were falling into place. "So what's the plan now? What are you guys thinking?" Edward and Matt exchanged a glance, silently agreeing on what needed to be done. "Now we take her down. We'll ruin her reputation, expose everything, and make sure she ends up with nothing after the divorce. She'll regret ever thinking she could have it all." Edward's voice was firm, filled with resolve. Matt leaned in, his eyes sharp with purpose. "She's going to pay for all the lies, the manipulation. She's going to know exactly what it feels like to be played." Jerry looked at them both, his anger now matching theirs. "I don't know what to say, but I'm in. Let's do it." The three men sat there, their alliance sealed with a shared goal. There was no turning back now. They were united by betrayal and fury, and they would make sure Samantha's lies came to light. The yacht rocked gently on the waves as Edward and Jerry stood together on the deck, each holding a glass of champagne. They exchanged a brief nod before heading into the private cabin where Samantha was waiting, completely unaware of their presence. The atmosphere was charged, filled with anticipation, and yet both men remained eerily calm. This was the moment they had orchestrated, and there would be no turning back. Inside the cabin, the dim lighting reflected off the polished surfaces. Samantha stood by the small table, her back to the door. She was already in the process of undoing the top buttons of her blouse, clearly preparing for the romantic evening with Jerry she thought she'd arranged. Jerry, with a slight grin on his face, stepped forward, ready to greet her. "I thought you'd be waiting for me." Jerry's voice was low, laced with a mixture of excitement and satisfaction. He walked toward her, the distance between them closing fast. Samantha turned, a smile beginning to form on her lips. "I didn't expect you so soon, but I'm glad you're here." She reached for him, her fingers grazing his chest as they locked eyes. But just as their lips were about to meet, the door swung open. "I didn't know I was interrupting something." Edward's voice rang out, cold and unmistakable. He stood in the doorway, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on Samantha and Jerry. Samantha froze. She quickly pulled away from Jerry, her face paling as she realized the gravity of the situation. Jerry, on the other hand, looked less surprised than one might expect. His eyes widened, but he quickly masked his shock with a faint smirk. "Edward," Samantha muttered, her voice tinged with panic. "What are you doing here? It's not what you think. Let me explain." Edward let out a small laugh, but it was devoid of any humor. "Explain? Really? There's nothing to explain. You've been living this lie for months, Sam. Behind my back, and now I see it all." He gestured to the room around him, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think it's time for you to face reality. This isn't just a one-time mistake. This is a pattern." Samantha's expression hardened, but there was something else beneath it. Fear. She couldn't deny that. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she started, but the words faltered in her throat. Edward's eyes were cold now, calculating. "Oh, you didn't mean for it to happen. You were just living for yourself, weren't you? Well, I've got a surprise for you, Sam." Samantha took a step back, feeling cornered. "Please, I was just—" Before she could finish her sentence, Edward pulled out his phone and turned on the camera, starting a live stream. He held the phone up for her to see. "Say hello to your coworkers, Sam." His voice was low, but every word carried weight. "Let's show them how you spend your business trips, huh?" Samantha's face went pale as she realized he was broadcasting this to her colleagues, her professional life and personal betrayal laid bare. "No, please don't!" She rushed forward to stop him, but Edward stepped back out of her reach. "Oh, I'm not done yet," Edward continued, his voice steady. "The yacht's not going back to port until you sign these." He threw a set of documents onto the table. "Sign these papers. You'll give up everything. The house, the assets, the car, and don't forget to tell Jerry to give the money back for this little getaway of yours." Samantha's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she was speechless. Her hands trembled as she reached for the papers. "Edward, you're not being fair." Edward ignored her, his voice growing colder. "Fair? You've been living a double life for months, Sam. This is the least you deserve." Jerry stood silently, watching the exchange with a resigned expression, but he wasn't going to let her off that easily. "It's over, Sam. This was never going to last." Samantha froze for a second like a cornered animal, then grabbed the lamp and hit Harry over the head with it. The men didn't have time to react when Samantha ran out of the cabin. Samantha, in a panic, ran out onto the deck, her heart racing, her legs trembling from the fear she could no longer contain. She knew her life was crumbling around her, and the first person she thought to turn to was the captain. He was the only person on the yacht who could still help her. She ran toward him, each step heavy, every breath hard to take. But she knew she had to do this, now or never. She spotted him standing by the wheel, his back to her. The wind whipped around, and the only sounds she could hear were the waves crashing against the boat and the frantic pounding of her own heart. Her mind was clouded, but all she could think of was asking him for help. He was the only one left who might be able to save her from the mess she'd created. When she got closer, the captain finally turned, her breath caught in her throat. "Matt?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, thick with panic. You're here? I don't know what to do. Help me!" Matt didn't answer immediately. He stood still, looking at her with a calm, detached expression. His hands remained steady on the wheel, his body unyielding. The warmth and affection she had once seen in his face were gone. Instead, he looked at her with a coldness she hadn't expected. "You can't say anything to me anymore, Samantha." His voice was firm, almost distant. "I know everything. I found out through Edward how you lied to both of us, how you've been playing us like fools. Do you think you can walk away from this with no consequences?" Samantha stared at him, shocked. Her heart sank and she felt the air leave her lungs. She hadn't expected this from him, not Matt. I thought we were," she stammered, but the words were hollow even to her. "You don't understand." Matt shook his head, a slight sigh escaping his lips. "No, Samantha, you're not understanding. You're not going to keep lying to me. This is the end." He took a few slow steps toward her, his expression stoic. "I'm ending our engagement right now, and I'll use my influence to make sure no one else ever gets fooled by you. You can't keep doing this to men. You can't hide behind your lies anymore." Samantha's mind raced. She felt trapped, desperate. "Matt, please, you don't understand. I've made mistakes, but—" "No, you haven't just made mistakes," Matt cut her off sharply. "You've destroyed everything. You want to fix this? Then sign the divorce papers. Right now. And then, maybe, we'll talk." Samantha's heart sank even further. The words stung, sharper than anything she'd ever felt. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Instead, she just stood there, stunned as the reality of her situation set in. Matt didn't flinch. He wasn't giving her any chance to wiggle out of this. He didn't even show a flicker of emotion. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Samantha couldn't answer. There was nothing left to say. 10. The clam opening tool. Samantha stood frozen, her pulse quickening, the chaos of everything that had unfolded weighing heavily on her. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths as she looked desperately around the deck, her eyes frantic. The realization that she was trapped, that everything she had worked so hard to hide was now out in the open, was almost more than she could bear. As her eyes darted about, she saw an older Asian woman in her 50s standing near the edge of the deck. The woman was carrying a large bucket, bent slightly under its weight. She approached a small wooden table where she set down the bucket and sat down lazily in the sun. The woman was calm, unhurried, opening clams with a small knife, her movements steady and methodical, as if this was a normal part of her day. For a moment, Samantha stood frozen, staring at the woman, trying to gather herself. The thought of being trapped on the yacht with nowhere to turn made her heart race. She couldn't let this be how it ended. She couldn't face the consequences of her lies, the betrayal, the deceit, and in her mind, the only escape was to make someone, anyone, help her, to somehow get her off this yacht before it was too late. Desperation surged within her, and without thinking, she ran toward the woman, her heels clicking loudly on the deck, the sound echoing in the vast emptiness around her. Reaching the table, she dropped to her knees. the clink of her knees hitting the wooden floor of the deck barely noticeable over the pounding in her chest. With a trembling hand, Samantha reached out toward the woman, gripping her knee, her voice cracking with emotion. "Help! I've been exposed by 3 of my lovers. They want revenge. I want to go ashore." Her words tumbled out in a frantic, breathless rush, her eyes wide, desperate for some kind of reaction, for something that would give her hope. The woman, however, simply looked at her, confusion spreading across her face. Her furrowed brow, the subtle tilt of her head, told Samantha all she needed to know. She didn't understand. The woman didn't speak English. She hadn't a clue what Samantha was saying. Samantha's breath hitched in her chest, and her frantic mind began to race even faster. The weight of the situation, the absurdity of it all, crashed down on her. She was a woman lost at sea, metaphorically and literally. Her plan was falling apart, and there was no one left to help her. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain herself again, but the woman's blank stare offered no comfort. This was it. She was truly alone. Just as the sinking feeling in her stomach reached its peak, a voice cut through the tension. "Samantha!" Samantha's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching as the familiar voice sent a shockwave through her. She didn't need to look to know who it was. It was Edward. Samantha's mind raced, her thoughts clouded with panic and desperation. She looked around, searching for something, anything that could give her a sense of control over the chaos of her life. Her eyes landed on the small clam-opening tool the woman had been using, still lying on the table. The tool, innocuous and harmless to anyone else, seemed to gleam in the sunlight. For Samantha, however, it was a symbol of her last attempt to make a choice, any choice, that might give her the power she felt slipping away. She reached out with trembling hands, grasping the tool tightly, her fingers closing around its handle. She didn't know what she was planning to do, but the feeling of holding something, anything, gave her a false sense of strength. Her mind screamed at her to act, to fight, to take control of a situation she had allowed to spiral out of her hands for far too long. Edward, however, saw the movement and instantly recognized the danger. His eyes widened as he realized what she was about to do. He darted to the side, narrowly avoiding being struck by the makeshift weapon she had grabbed. But Samantha's frantic rush had caused her balance to falter. In the midst of her wild, erratic movements, she lost her footing on the slick deck, the frantic energy of the moment throwing her off. Her feet slid beneath her, and before she could react, her body twisted and she was sent hurtling toward the edge of the yacht. Edward's heart raced as he saw her stumble, but there was nothing he could do. The next thing he knew, Samantha's body was already tipping over the side of the yacht, her arms flailing for purchase as she fell. It all happened so fast. A loud splash echoed in the air as Samantha hit the water below, disappearing beneath the surface before Edward could make a move. For a moment, there was nothing but the rippling water, as if the sea had swallowed her whole. Later, the police would fully confirm that it was an accident. The 3 men sat in silence, surrounded by an air of finality. The setting was almost surreal. The soft hum of distant conversations, the faint rustle of flowers arranged in intricate patterns around the room. A portrait of Samantha hung at the front, a smile frozen in time on her face. But it was no longer the face of the woman they had once known. Edward, still wearing the same suit he had worn for days, stood up and walked toward the podium. The room seemed to quiet in anticipation, the weight of what was happening sinking in. He could feel the eyes of the others on him, not just the men, but also the few guests who had dared to show up. For a moment, everything was suspended. It was as if the world was holding its breath. Edward cleared his throat, his expression cold, almost unreadable. He looked around the room before his gaze finally fell on the portrait of his wife. He thought about how everything had ended, not with the anger he once expected, but with a sickening sense of detachment. How much had he really known her? With a slight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes, he began, "Samantha, what can I say? She was the most loyal woman I've ever known." He let those words hang in the air for a beat before continuing. "Loyal to her own desires, to her secrets, to the men she chose to share her bed with. She was the kindest, most generous woman I ever had the privilege of calling my wife." He glanced at the men in the back of the room. She was truly an inspiration to us all, a shining example of how to lie, how to deceive, and how to smile through it all. A hushed murmur rippled through the room, but Edward didn't pause. He could hear the strained breath of the other 2 men, and For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of something, a satisfaction perhaps, or maybe just the completion of a long-awaited ending. Turning back to the portrait, he finished, "She was everything she promised to be, until she wasn't." His voice trailed off, but his eyes never left the image. "Rest in peace, Samantha. May you finally find the peace you were always seeking." As Edward finished his ironic speech, a moment of silence enveloped the room. The finality of his words hung in the air, thick with the bitterness of betrayal and the weight of a love lost. The portrait of Samantha still loomed at the front of the room, but now it felt like a cruel joke. The woman in the picture was long gone, replaced by the ghost of the lies she had spun. But just as Edward was about to leave the podium, a loud voice cut through the tension. "You!" A woman's shrill voice echoed across the room, her finger pointing directly at Edward. "This is all your fault! You've ruined everything!" It was Samantha's mother, standing up abruptly, her face contorted with rage. Her eyes were wide, filled with grief and fury as she made her way towards Edward. The guests were in shock, unsure of how to react. Edward didn't flinch, his gaze steady as he looked at the woman who had raised the woman he had once loved. He let her come closer, her accusations loud and desperate. But he wasn't afraid. He had heard enough of this. "You think this is my fault?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge of finality. "You think I did this to your daughter? You think I wanted any of this to happen?" The mother, her face flushed with anger, stepped closer, her words coming faster now. "She was a good girl. She didn't deserve this. You've torn our family apart." Edward stood tall, his jaw set as he slowly stepped forward. The room fell silent as all eyes shifted to the confrontation. His voice lowered but carried a cold intensity. "You don't get it, do you? Your daughter, your good girl, wasn't good at all. She was selfish, manipulative, and deceitful, and now she's gone. Not because of me, but because of her own choices, her own cruelty. You should have seen it, but you didn't want to." Samantha's mother recoiled, her lips trembling as if trying to form a rebuttal. "You don't understand. You can't." "No, you don't understand," Edward interrupted, his words like daggers. "She's gone because of her own hatred, her lies, and her need for destruction. She couldn't even be honest with herself, let alone anyone else. And now you want to blame me? I didn't break her. She did this to herself." The room was still as grave, the guests staring at the scene unfolding before them. No one dared to speak, their breath caught in the tension of the moment. Samantha's mother stood there, stunned, struggling for words, but there was nothing left to say. Edward's voice softened, but held an undeniable truth. "She was never who you thought she was. And now, she'll live with the consequences of her actions, just like we all have to." With that, Edward turned away from the stunned woman, his shoulders straight, his eyes cold but resolute. Samantha's mother stood there, speechless, the weight of her daughter's actions finally hitting her in full force. Edward stepped down from the podium and walked towards the exit, the two men, Matt and Greg, following close behind. They didn't need to say anything. The silence between them spoke volumes. It was over. The chapter had ended. Samantha was gone, not because of him, but because of the choices she had made, and now that there was nothing left to do but move on. The three men made their way out of the hall, and as they walked toward the door, Edward couldn't help but feel the slightest pang of relief. The truth had been spoken, and there was no turning back now. The past was done. It was time to let go. Edward took a seat at the bar, his eyes scanning the empty glasses in front of him. Matt and Greg sat beside him, their faces weary but strangely calm, as though they had finally reached a place where the storm was over. Edward poured himself a drink and raised it slowly, without saying a word. The other two followed suit, each of them holding their glass, but it was Greg who finally broke the silence. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice low. Edward didn't hesitate. He took a long sip before answering, his gaze never leaving the glass. "Now, we move on. We find a way to live with the choices we made, but at least we're not living a lie anymore." Matt nodded. "She was good at making us believe we were everything to her, huh?" "Yeah," Edward said with a dry chuckle. "She had us all fooled, but we're smarter now." He leaned back in his chair, allowing the booze to settle in his veins. "And that's something she'll never have." For a moment, they all sat in quiet reflection, letting the weight of what had happened sink in. Then, without a word, they all raised their glasses once more. "To the truth," Edward said, his voice steady but filled with finality. The other two men clinked their glasses together, and for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of closure between them. The past was behind them, and no matter what the future held, they had all found a way to move forward.